Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coast, Be the Media. Real opinions from real women, from sea to shining sea. My name is Jenny Lee, and I'm from New York. And tonight I have with me, straight from the border in Texas, El Paso, Miss Emma.
Hi there.
And Mary from Long Island.
Hello.
So tonight's topic is going to be on immigration. We figured it'd be a really good topic to cover, considering we have Emma that's right in El Paso, Texas, seeing all sorts of things going on, and she's a wealth of knowledge. So why don't you give us your bird's eye view of what you're seeing down at the border, Miss Emma?
Well, I can tell you right now that this is going to be like Holy Week, especially between Mexico and the United States, where a lot of crossings come via the ports of entry. But the ports of entry have been reduced as far as the number of lanes go. So traffic, in fact, last week on Thursday, I think the waiting period for getting across through the port of entry was 4 to 5 hours.
Now, they said that the wall is being built in El Paso. Are you seeing actual evidence of a real wall being built?
Oh, sure. We had a wall before. There was a wall here already. In fact, we've had portions of wall that have been here since the 1950s.
Oh, wow.
And they weren't like the substantial wall we're seeing now, but they, chain link and different forms of trying to get people to herd them through the ports of entry.
So, Emma, when we see the wall, we see pictures of wall, and we always see like kind of these metal looking, they almost look like the side of a freight car with numbers on them, which looks like something you could climb right over. What are you seeing being built now?
Okay, that was preliminary. I understand, like scrap metal that was put up, and what they're doing is they're replacing that with the 18 to 30 foot panels.
The building, it's the trench that you can see through.
Correct, because the border, well, see, they're going by what the Border Patrol, which are the experts on the ground, they're the ones that are determining what is really needed for visibility. I mean, there's equipment on top of it. There's like a 5-foot panel in major areas on the top where you can't really grasp to get over it. And the wall itself is only one section of a comprehensive plan in order to provide the security. And this has been very excellent at slowing them down.
So you want to touch on what makes this more of a humanitarian crisis, including, I think they found 1,675 bodies that they had uncovered in the desert, in the sections that were not walled off, that they're trying to get through, as well as many of the other tragedies that occur on the trek from the triangle up into the border.
You can find online, just do research, immigration, deaths, coroner, Arizona, New Mexico, those areas. And you'll find that what'll happen is they'll just come upon bodies being called in, some of it's skeletal, to have coroners come, and they come and tag them and try to make an identification. And many of the bodies have stayed in the care of the coroner for years.
So exactly how far from Juarez are you?
I'm about 10 miles because I live up on a hill, maybe a little less. I live up on a hill way away from the border, but the border fluctuates. So when you're looking at the actual border itself, living on the border, many people don't like to buy property or live down there because back in the 80s, there was a lot of crime. They'd come around, steal all your kids' toys and your cars, and there was assaults and worse, kidnapping for profit. And anytime you'd come here and burglarize or whatever, you just run across the border and it's a whole different country. So in order to prosecute, you'd have to extradite someone. So you come here, you kill someone, you run back, who's going to know? Because the person was never tagged and identified anyway.
Do you guys ever find any random bodies just thrown on the other side of where there's a non-wall over in the desert area that's open?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, you can go and you can hear
I have
When
read a few. That's why I asked. So
right, when the president was in McAllen, Texas, just days before then, there was like 30 bodies that had been found in a very shallow grave on the Mexico side, where there's a lot of gang warfare going on and a lot of cartel stuff going on. So when um, that gets told to us, usually it's very gory. In other words, people don't have any heads, or they don't have any arms, or it's just obviously it's terrorizing the other cartel with each other to see who can outdo the terror to make their territory imperative more ferocious.
all right.
People
So
people don't realize. I mean, the average person who doesn't live anywhere near a border town, there are entire places in Texas or on the border where you can't all go out of the house at the same time. Somebody has to remain home, because if you all leave, you all can't go to a movie or grandma's house for Thanksgiving dinner or anything, or you're going to come back and find your home invaded. People don't understand, these are not, you know, cuddly little warm immigrants coming in just trying to find refuge. These are cartels, these are criminals, these are rapists, these are murderers. And I'm not saying every Mexican, please, I don't want to hear from anybody that, you know, I said every Mexican is a rapist or a criminal. But this is who these people are finding in their homes. This is not just the immigration story like my grandparents or your grandparents.
All right,
but they're just not from Mexico or the Triangle either. There's a jihadi training camp right outside in that area as well that they've discovered. So it's not like we're just dealing with Hispanic people. We're dealing with people from, I forgot the last count. It was crazy, like 87 different countries. I know that number's wrong. But when people say, oh, well, you know, you're racist, you're against Spanish people. No, 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 no. There's like 87 different countries that are coming in across that border. And again, I know the number that I'm saying is incorrect. I don't have the correct number.
in McAllen. Okay, in McAllen, during the week prior to the Trump visit, there were illegals that were captured. This is just the captured ones, okay?
Right. Exactly.
We don't have the other ones, from 61 different countries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it isn't, what people have a hard time understanding is Hispanic is not a race. You have Black Hispanics, Chinese Hispanic, you have white Hispanics, you have American Indian Hispanic. Hispanic is an ethnic origin. So it isn't, you know, in fact, what's more scaring, which I always try to stress to people, is that many times a Middle Eastern person can pass as a Hispanic based on their physical attributes.
Correct.
And so you have people that are coming across the border that are passing for Hispanic and claiming to be refugees, and they could be terrorists.
Exactly. Exactly. And they are in many cases.
They are true. They are finding that they are terrorists, and they're all gaming the system. And they know that if they come, remember that situation where you saw in the movie Titanic, where the crumb bun grabs a random child and says, "I have a child,"
Yes.
and they let him on the life raft boat.
Well, and that's what Homeland Security's been saying. What's really changing is they're starting to see a lot more families, because they've been founding. Of course, you know, if anytime there's a system, people will find a way to skirt the system. That if you have a child with you, it expedites your process. You're only held for 20 days, and then you're released into the general public. So now we're starting to see more children, and that's what's becoming a big situation at the border.
What is even more sad is that once the supposed family unit is turned loose, those same children are sent back to Mexico and accompany a whole new group of people.
Do it again. Yeah.
Pretending to be their family.
Heard this, yep.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's get into their country free ticket.
There's a little boy up here by me, and I'm not gonna say his name or anything, but just know he's my youngest son's age, and he's got scars all over his face, and he has told me about how that every so often he has to go help other people come. And he lives in a house with people who he's not related to any of them.
So what you know, what is the humanitarian crisis there? Gee, Children are being used to bring people into the country. They're being completely and totally abused and harmed.
Well, let me ask you, say you come to the United States, just put yourself into that shoes, those shoes. Just you as regular folks, you find yourself in a different state, in a different city, with no money and the shoes on your back. How do you survive?
And you're right. And
I'm,
not only that, I mean, your education and your other skills are all much lower than where you've been placed.
but
So,
many of them don't speak English.
right. You've already way behind the 8 ball to even getting acclimated.
But I mean, how would you survive if you had no
Well,
food?
You'd have to sell yourself. If all you have is yourself, you have to sell yourself.
For your children.
For your children.
Correct.
For your children. Yes. Yeah. I worked with many illegals. I used to work in a drug clinic, and we would see where they would sell their children for drug money. They would traffic their own children, and you know, how is this humane to allow this to come into our country? These people come in from, sometimes, like you said, the Middle East. They've never even seen a winter in their lives. They've never seen snow in their lives. They have to adapt to the environment, the culture, the customs, the language, the poverty. I mean, we bring them here in poverty.
So how do they survive? If you can't legally, you can't work. You have to have some kind of funding to buy falsified identification to get into the system.
And to top it off, they're advertising down in the triangle. And for those who don't know, the triangle is the 3 main countries, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, where we do see most of the bulk of the illegal immigration coming from. But they're advertising down there, and they're telling them, there's stuff here for you. We're going to take care of you. You just have to get there. And they're coming here and not realizing that, whoa, those were lies.
Well, let me give you an example of what happened at Christmas. Just before Christmas, thousands of illegals had been processed and were dropped off at the Greyhound bus station downtown El Paso. And there are some charities here, which I'm not going to mention them because I don't want you to support them because they're part of the problem. We're trying to find locations to house them temporarily so they could get to their next destination. And you kind of go, does that mean somebody is going to send them money? How are they going to get, I mean, you don't have any money, you don't have a ticket. How do you get to that next location? So people were getting, a whole bunch of them were staying at some churches and some places, and they were paying for hotels and different things. Within 10 days, a flu strain epidemic came through El Paso like nobody's business. It was like a surge. And what is the incubation period for a flu that you may not have gotten your shot for, or you may not have as a norm within your community? Well, you get these volunteers who were thinking they're doing the decent thing, you know, they've been asked and to help and bring things. Come to find out, the purveyors of this whole organization that tries to help with the illegals, they're getting reimbursed for that.
Yeah, they're getting paid for that. They are. They get federal money, lots and lots of money. Nobody's working for free, including the churches. There's federal grants out there for nonprofits. Right. They just have to prove a number. This many people.
And another thing that, you know, you said, you know, what do you do when you get here, and how do you survive? There was a story of a woman who, she applied for a job with a major company. I don't remember what company it was, and it's irrelevant, but it was a company that has national reach. And she applied for the job, and when it got down to where they wanted her social security number, they called her and they said, we can't hire you because you already work here.
Oh.
And upon further investigation, it turned out that her social security number was in use by like 200 people nationwide.
The most common social security number that is used at the hospital down here, which is right on the border, the University Medical Center, is all zeros.
Mm.
And when a nurse tried to push back on that, she was told by her supervisor, they're not there to do that. They're there to treat. Just
Mm.
fill it out, whatever's there. And then these people would go right across the border the next day getting their free stuff. And there's no way to bill them and there's no way to find them. They come over and they show up in the emergency room and get what they can. And then I know because my mom had to go to the emergency room and I took her and we would just look around and it was craziness. Very, very crazy.
So when you go out food shopping, what is the demographics of what El Paso is now compared to what El Paso was 10 to 15 years ago? Because we're still waiting for the census, and we haven't had a census in a long time. And since we are a long time, every 10 years, since 2010. And a lot has happened since then, including all the unaccompanied minors under Obama. We had a whole surge with that. We had the refugees that were resettled, the Somali refugees. And there's been a lot of intake that's been, I think people are going to be very shocked when they see the census when it comes in. But I'm just curious, visually, I don't know how long you've been in El Paso, how long you can speak for it, of how it's changed over time and what it looks like now.
Well, El Paso has always been highly Hispanic or Hispanic derivatives. That's not really a problem. You have the base here, Fort Bliss, which is, just strategically located and is expanding like crazy. But when you have a community that's like 85 or more percent Hispanic or some sort of a blend, we're just a community. I mean, it isn't like, and there's blacks here, there's Chinese, there's a
I was
whole.
there last year, and the one thing that I really, really stuck out to me and is how the poverty really stands out more than when Fort Bliss was first being built and the community was thriving and it was a military, family orientated town in El Paso. And when I was out just, going about regular business with my mom and stuff, and I noticed that it had become very impoverished.
It's not a prosperous environment. The wages in this area are very depressed. And that's part of that is because if you get someone who is working illegally, they're going to undercut the people who are really working 100% on the books. So when you have that, the guys who are trying to do it right and they can't compete.
Yeah.
But you get what you pay for. In other words, if you don't have people that are there that are legal and they're being paid, like whatever it is, $3 an hour, and then they go back across the border because that's a lot of money there. You wonder about your guarantees for the work that was done, up to specs. Yeah, up to your building specs.
It makes me wonder about home values too. I mean, people invest in their homes. What are the values like there now, Emma?
Well, in every area, you have the higher end homes, 300,000, and the places that you can go closer to the border that you can pick up for 63,000.
Mm.
And they're older and they're kind of run down, or as I call it, the fix it up as you live.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a wide span of things. There is quite a blend. There's a huge gap between very, very wealthy people to people who are just here temporarily that are scrounging. One of the biggest fears was that when the Border Patrol cut down the number of lanes of traffic that were coming across at the ports of entry, and the waiting lines get very long. Of course, the people who are producing product that are coming up from Mexico, they're waiting forever. Some of their rigs are only qualified to be delivery across the border, and they go to warehouses or dumping and then they go back. They're not qualified to be able to get on the roads and drive. So we get a lot of that. And the warehouse people were very concerned. And now you've got all the people who do have a right to come back and forth, who are eligible to, it's not like nobody can travel. We can all travel. It's just you have to have the proper paperwork. I could go to Juarez if I wanted to be scary and take my passport, you know.
Can you
But
go
there
to the
isn't,
live feed?
we were talking the other day and it says, well, what is it that Mexico produces that we don't already have in the United States?
Yeah, Oreos. They moved Oreos down
Or
there.
Oreos, right?
We need more Oreos.
Right.
Jeez.
I
All right.
just want, I wonder with all these delays and you know, I'm even thinking about how that affects us as consumers, because that's got to affect the cost of goods. It's got to affect perishables coming across the border. You can't have trucks sitting for 4 hours with perishable goods. Who knows what's going to happen to us on this side? How this affects us?
Well, not only that, you've got people who are coming across the border and have, therefore, they pay no property taxes and go to our schools.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, big time.
And so when the threat was that the border might close, the university here, University of Texas at El Paso, was trying to deploy an emergency process whereby people could still go to college and be staying with people until what they consider to be the end was over. Or you've got huge numbers of children that are coming over every day, and buses pick them up at the border and take them to the schools. So they're taking advantage of the lunch programs, they're taking advantage of the education, and yet there's not $1 of property taxes that are sustaining that.
Or income taxes or anything else for that matter.
Well, they get subsidized by the government based on attendance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But whether or not you can force them to get a shot or any kind of a vaccine or an immunization of any kind, or what the requirements are. In fact, there was one school that was looking into doing web connectivity because parents who've been deported and their children are still coming over here couldn't attend some of the events.
Oh God.
So they're trying to work around the law.
So
So you see,
you don't mean web connectivity just so kids can attend school. You mean web connectivity so the parents on the other side of the border can be at the school play or something like that.
correct.
Oh
Right.
wow.
Or parent teachers
Yeah,
or watch graduation. Yeah, or watching. Yeah.
right. Got to get to the PTA.
Wow.
So there's all these complications. And again, I mean, all of this is the outcome of people not doing it the legal way.
Nobody talks about any of this stuff ever. All right. So before we hit our half-hour mark, I just want to take it back to, so here I am now. I'm a poor huddled mess, yearning to be free with my family. I made it through all the drug cartels. I don't know how I did that. I've made it to the border. I found a breach in the border and I snuck through, or no, I came in through a port of entry, right? Because now I'm going to do this legal way, right? I came in through the port of entry and I say, I'm claiming asylum. My life is at risk. I have a child that may or may not be mine with me, and we're here to seek asylum. What happens then? Because there's this big deal out there that I hear our president constantly being blamed for separating families and putting kids in cages when they're at the border. So let's start at the border, and then we'll talk about what happens when we release them into society and the costs associated with that.
Well, there's two avenues whereby asylum comes up. First, you might come to you can go to a consulate or to an embassy anywhere along the way and apply.
Yes, but that's not what happened because I made it through the cartel.
Okay, but well, actually, you probably paid maybe $5,000 or $6,000 to have a coyote deliver you. Which, if something happens along the way, they've got their money up front, or there's some sort of
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. I'm already dead.
You just bought the child, and that's part of your payment.
I'm dead under the rape tree, and they have Alice.
You could be. It doesn't matter. They've got their money.
Right, and now they have a child.
So
yeah, I don't suppose you can dispute the charge on your Visa card.
No.
That's it. Yeah.
So if you come into a port of entry, what they were doing here is they were meeting the requesters halfway across the bridge and taking their application and then telling them to remain in Mexico. That was the most recent situation, which is fair. In other words, you've just passed up all these different countries. United Nations said if you want to apply for asylum, it has to be certain reasons why. You have to be persecuted by your own country, and it has to be based on a class of people.
Okay, so I passed, and now I'm in the cage without.
You're not in a cage. There's the last place, the last time the
That's
cages
what I want
came
to
up.
get into. I want to get into the cages.
The last time anybody was in cages was back in the Obama administration. So there are no cages. These kids live very well. But the thing is that
They're gated off areas. They're not cages. They're meant to separate ages from gender, ages from ages, and genders from genders. Correct?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was.
And the thing is you have to establish whether that child is actually a relative or not. And they've deployed, what they attempt to do is to, first of all, the first thing they do is make sure everybody's healthy and safe. There is no less than 60 to 100, depending on the batch of people that are crossing in groups of 200 and 300, sometimes more. They take them to the hospital. We've got Border Patrol people that are nothing more than, or Uber drivers, to take them to the emergency room where they're seen at public expense before turning them back into detention.
Christian Nielsen said that when they do that whole medical process, that they're required to test every young lady over the age of 12 for pregnancy.
I can't tell you. I have no idea.
Well, I remember. No, I can speak and say that was what she said during the hearing that she had in front of Congress.
But I mean, as far as what locally goes on here, I don't know. So then they would try to keep those people together while they're trying to decide what they could do with them. These people have to understand that when they are claiming, first of all, many of them don't claim asylum until they're caught.
Sure.
This isn't, hello, hands up, love me, I want to, I've got an asylum claim, right?
12 7-Elevens on your way to this 7-Eleven.
They're found wandering within 100 miles of the border, and they're scooped up. And that would be a charge of illegal entry. But then they go, oh, no, asylum. What did they do? They made a left turn at the wrong 7-Eleven and then wandered.
Like you said, Moses. Consulates that you passed on the way that you could have said, hey, I'm really scared. So I'm here to claim asylum.
Then you get pictures of people who were kept under a bridge in what was a makeshift chain link fence that would just happen it was like maybe 10 days ago. That was just to hold them out of the heat underneath, where there's shade, till they could be taken in groups over to the processing center.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It looked like they were under the cement overpasses.
Correct. And that was just temporary. And then what they were doing is moving them in groups where they could handle them to get all the information and to process them to provide the transportation. And then as night started to fall, they took the remaining of them because it was going to be a little chilly that night, and they wanted to make sure all those people were, kept in a humanly comfortable holding area. But that's what you take, is you get somebody from one of the news media that's taking a picture and said, look at these people, they're in cages. Or no, they were not. They were just put in there so that they would be contained temporarily until they could be processed. By the end of the day, they were all where they needed to be.
So under the current law, which is the zero tolerance law, which is what Trump had put into process, so now this is all in. 20 days, they get released, and they're supposed to come back and appear whenever they want for their court case, which they normally don't.
Well, I think you're referring to the Flores agreement.
Correct. Well, I think at this point we'll probably want to get into the Flores agreement, because since they're going to be talking about comprehensive immigration reform, hopefully soon, that's one of the big things that needs to be changed, as well as the Plyer versus Doe.
Well, where the Flores agreement came on, there was a lady, a 15-year-old. She was arrested. She was from El Salvador, and she was, I think, at Ysidro, California. I probably said that wrong. I should know better.
San Isidro?
Yeah, there you go.
When was this?
That was in 1985 when she was 15. So her last name was Flores, and she was here from El Salvador by herself. She was unaccompanied. And she was trying to get into the United States to meet up with her illegal mom. Okay. So she was scooped up. And at that time, the ruling was that you could only be released to your parent.
So this is under Reagan.
What?
This is under Reagan.
Well, it was 1985 would have been, yeah, Reagan. Okay. Toward the end of his, because he signed amnesty into effect in 1986. But so she's 15, she gets scooped up. The parent doesn't want to come get her because the parent, the mom, is afraid she'll be arrested for being here illegally. Because INS at that time was doing background checks on all the parents to make sure they weren't doing horrible things. So she was there for 2 months, and the ACLU filed a case on her behalf. I think it was 4 other youths that were being held at the same time to get them released. They were claiming that they were co-housed with other adult people, and based on what they were claiming were horrible conditions and things like that. So within 10 days of the court case being filed, she was released.
Okay.
To this day, I can't find out where she is or what happened to her. We're just talking about the fact she's almost 50 years old now, so we don't know where she is. But her case, which was went on for a number of years after she was turned loose. And then it came out that there was this lawsuit proceeded, and during that lawsuit, the case of whether or not illegals had the right to be released to just anyone other than their parent went to the Supreme Court. And what they determined was that under the Constitution and under law, the illegals had no right to just be turned loose to anyone. And part of an agreement that occurred years later, which was, I think we said 12 years later after she had been arrested and then turned loose, 12 years later, it finally comes to something called the Flores Agreement. And what that did is it delineated certain conditions that now that INS, the whole immigration system, agreed to. What they were, they were agreeing to conditions of being held separately and for a short period of time, and some place that was going to be taking care of them and had some education and allowed visitors and had a number of things that were going to make their life a little bit more pleasant. But it was supposed to only be temporary. The Flores Agreement was that as soon as procedures came into place and were published, meaning here, this is the new rules, this is what we're going to go by, this is going to be procedures and stuff within the INS system, that the Flores Agreement would go away 45 days after the procedures were finalized and published. And that was like 30 years ago.
This was the one this was under Janet Reno at this point, right?
Well, the first file was Flores versus Meese, and then it transformed into Flores versus Reno. Okay. Now it's been it went Flores versus Lynch, and then it became Flores versus Sessions.
Because it's just a continuation.
Correct. And so the new deal.
Wait, we've been dealing with the same unaccompanied minor that's been lost since Reagan and Janet Reno and all these people.
Case. Okay.
So we've been losing them from the beginning, but somehow it's now Trump's fault.
Right.
He's a bouncing baby 55-year-old. Yes.
So it's just the case. In other words, it was the captioning of the case and the triggering event that gave it that name that occurred years later. So in 1997, the Flores Agreement came up to this agreement, right? So this was 1997 from 1985, which was 12 years it took to finally come up with this signature agreement. What they were doing for 12 years, I can't tell you.
Wow.
I know. But
So
like I
now
said,
a lot of these kids though also are just left in the facilities when the adults are, because they're not really related to the adults. I think there's a lot of misinformation with people who think that real actual families like I have here with my children are being separated, and that's so untrue. A lot of these kids are being left.
well, there's a huge number of them that are unaccompanied. That means that there's
Right.
no parent with them, no
Nobody's
parent or
picking
legal
them up,
guardian.
right? Or they came with no one at all.
Right.
And a
So
lot of them also lie about their age because they have no
we have
identification. So
no idea who they are.
a
Correct.
20-year-old identifying as a 15-year-old.
So when you think about it, it's been 34 years since Flores was first arrested in 1985. And here we are still referencing that case in its different mutations.
Mm.
And I
Yeah,
think
we
it's really
appreciate it.
important. Yeah, I think that's really important, meaning that there was some changes that occurred. For instance, in 2008, there's been other agreements and other things that have happened, but there was in 2008 a Trafficking Victims Protection Act that
Yep.
came that parts of the Flores agreement were incorporated into that. So it transferred itself into a form of law.
Mm.
And what that agreement in 2008, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, allows that Mexican youths can be returned to Mexico and Canadian youths can be returned to Canada. But it left out all of the youths that had any connection to South and Central America or any other country.
Got it.
And so
So
guess
that's
who's
why they'll say, I'm from Mexico.
right? So guess who's coming?
Right.
Oh,
Or no, I
of
wouldn't
course.
actually. I wouldn't say. I'd say I'm from Guatemala. This way, you can't throw me out, no matter what.
Well, the people that were the leftists and who wanted to allow unfettered illegal immigration for whatever. People claim it's for cheap labor. Other people have other more nefarious situations. Could be trafficking, prostitution, drugs, whatever you want to do. There's things that it could be, organ harvesting. It could
Or
be
that's where I was at.
terrible stuff, abuse with children. They saw this back in the 70s. And it was one of these things where you need to keep this in mind. It's called law was being used as an entry to power, which
Yeah, it is.
you use the law as a hammer to go against the establishment of common sense and good governance, to use case law for every little thing, which is what I try to do is I try to go back to the original law to try to find out different things. For instance, one of the things in the Flores case is they were claiming she was being strip searched all the time. I can't tell you if that's the case because I can't find any paperwork to that. Something like that probably wouldn't be online, probably wouldn't be investigative even.
Well, it'd be sealed because she was a minor.
I mean, maybe not, because we don't know what if she ever got picked up after that for something else. I mean, we're talking, we just don't, people just don't disappear. She's somewhere. She's still breathing.
Oh, like, where is she? We've been doing case law.
Where is she? Where's her mom?
1985. Where are you and your mom? You need to answer this court docket. And who's paying your attorney?
Well,
paying.
and that's an interesting thing because anyone who seeks asylum or any kind of a status like that, they have to provide their own attorney. That is not something that is publicly provided.
Well, wasn't the ACLU picked that up as one of their?
Yeah, they do that for their infamy, right?
Right.
But somebody's got to pay them. They don't look like they're starving.
Right. So, all right. So the kids are in the communities. We've got 8,000 unaccompanied minors. 2014 get shipped to Long Island, and most of them get put in schools over by me and Mary.
Correct.
And now, I don't know if you guys recall, about 3 months ago, I don't know. I live in Trump time, so everything's a little blurry at times.
You had that stabbing.
We had the Burger King stabbing at my daughter's, with
Yeah, it was
involving
terrible.
students at my daughter's school.
That was
Um,
terrible.
it was, and even the president was tweeting about it. But come to find out, three of the boys that were arrested, one had just come here about 2 years. He was 20 years old, and he was in with the 15-year-olds enrolled as a sophomore. So how do things like that happen? How are we being forced to educate children who just came here a few years ago? But not only that, putting adults in with children who are from a completely different culture.
Well, keep in mind that there was a Supreme Court case, which was Plyer v. Doe in 1982, that said that the Supreme Court determined that children without papers can attend public schools. That was done at the Supreme Court level. However, states themselves have made additional laws that control what happens in your state or your communities. All this said was you can't keep children just because they don't have documentation, you can't keep them out. And that was consistent with what was going on when we had people who were working under the normal migrant workers. You would get the proper green paperwork, you'd come in, whatever. Yeah. And what they were trying to say was you have a guy who's got a job, who's been hired for agriculture. He's here as a seasonal migrant worker, and his women and his wife and his children come with their appropriate status visas for that period of time. And yes, they have a right to go to school. That was where that whole court case was.
But somewhere in there, they redefined what a child was, because in 1982, we didn't have 20-year-olds in high school.
Well,
and now,
New York State is required to educate up to the age of 21 under the special education law.
yeah, and we have some districts here on Long Island where the high school and the middle school are one. So we have 12-year-olds. We'll have 7 through 12. We have 12-year-olds on the same school bus as a 21-year-old.
Yes, we do.
So to answer that question, you have
not a 21-year-old, somebody who was raised here in suburbia.
No, but that's something you have to find out. Is that your state law, or is that?
No,
I think it's a state law. Yeah,
it's a special education law, actually.
Because each state, the age of consent to be emancipated is different. Some places it's 14, some places it's 16. So, depending on what of the 50 states and territories you live in, the local law would determine that.
Wow.
You know who would know? Candy would know. I'm not sure, but I know that there's a law that we have to, in New York State, educate up to the age of 21.
Up to age of 21, yeah, that's a state law.
I'm not remembering correctly whether it's the special ed law or because it was so long ago that I looked it up, but I think it was not. So I want to correct that real quick. But I know that we are required either way up to the age of 21. So there's laws that are laws that were meant to help society are now being skirted in so many different ways that are giving this current problem that's impacting really every community coast to coast in the United States.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned was the Statue of Liberty, and bring me you're tired and you're weary and all the blah, blah, blah.
Masses.
But one of the things you may want to review for your audience sake was that was on the bottom of, I think it's on the pedestal. And it was done well after the placement of the Statue of Liberty as a fundraiser for renovating it many years later.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, that was never,
it was never at it was I think they had some sort of a contest, and the person who created that.
But not only that, when you went through Ellis Island, you were checked for ticks. You were given immunizations. If you had any type of disease, anything, you were sent back. They were not playing. There was nothing going on there. So, they were coming in through that point of entry at that time. They were doing what we would call legal entry.
you realize that immigration was, except for very few circumstances, immigration was shut down nearly completely for over 40 years till the 1960s. That was in order to allow people to acclimate and to allow those individuals who had come here legitimately to assimilate. And you can only have so many people that can be sustained without it starting to affect the prosperity of your nation.
Right.
It's with the idea that they're embracing our culture. They're embracing our laws and our constitution and our way of life. Otherwise, you get pockets of individuals who, even for 2 generations or longer, have their own country within a country. And, you know, I see people here in the El Paso area that have been here 40 years and they still don't speak a speck of English.
Yeah. We have a lot of that. We have a lot of that here also.
Yeah. It's generational. It's the new generational welfare.
So when you have the best jobs and you have the best at everything, when it comes to law, everything that is important to our structure is done in English. You lose your continuity of the base culture of what it is to be American. Not that we can't blend in and enjoy everybody's bits of uniqueness, but we are Americans.
Right.
And we're here to embrace our Americanism. We're not here to set up cultures within cultures.
That little boy I told you about earlier, I had a long talk with him about that because he kept saying, you know, when I have to go back to my country, and I had explained to him that if you're going to live here, this has to be your country.
Yeah, this is your country.
Either this is your country, or you can't be here and say, that's not how this is going to work.
You know, people forget that one of the things that was adopted into America was from the Magna Carta, in which wonderful patriots in Europe forced the king of the time to acknowledge that they had rights, that in other words, the kingdom of the rights of the king being sovereign was limited. And he had to acknowledge under duress that the people he just couldn't do anything at all with the people. And that whole freedom transferred over into the establishment of our own country when people came here to the manifest destiny of this nation. So, you know, we get all this thing where people down here are going, oh, you know, this territory used to belong to Mexico. Well, you forget, my friends, that Mexico was paid a large amount of money.
Yep.
After the war. There was a Spanish-American War, and lines were defined.
Yep.
And historically, lines of established civilizations, it's just the name of the game, are established by conquest. That's just the fact of the matter. Nobody said to Rome, oh yeah, you can't keep moving around Europe, right? Or whatnot. And had it not been for the fact that strong opposition historically kept Genghis Khan and those and his clan from moving even farther west into Europe, how likelihood it would have been that we would have been, a derivative of that. Often people have said in a more contemporary history, had it not been for the United States going in and getting into the war, World War II especially, France would be speaking German. So the nature of the beast is that you have a lot of might to enforce your sovereignty. Hopefully, you never have to use it.
Right.
I think we're seeing that in America. We don't want to go and be the determiner of everybody else's destiny. What we're seeing in Venezuela right now is people are trying to throw off the chains of tyranny and establish themselves as a free people. And you say, think about Mexico. They're not closing off their southern border. They're allowing these people to pass through. Well, if Mexicans ever realized that their military was so weak and their police were so weak that they couldn't even hold back 10, 15,000 people, the total 145 million people of Mexico could say, we don't care for this arrangement. We're going to set up a free country. And we're going to kick out the cartels, and we're going to have freedom in our time. Mexico's full of resources.
So, but
They've got a
not
lot
to interrupt you, but now we're going into Venezuela, and we need to stay in the United States and cover what President Trump recently said he was going to do, which is start giving the people, the immigrants, to the states who said they wanted them.
Sanctuary cities.
And there's a reason behind that.
Right, because those areas are already blue states, blue environments. But if you continue to allow the illegals to infiltrate all the other places, like other parts of Texas, you eventually turn those locations blue.
So this, in effect, is a modern day way of redistricting.
Yeah, surely. And so unless we get voter ID in to where we can assure that Americans only vote, we don't have foreign invaders and foreign caravans coming in and ultimately usurping our right to be sovereign, we will have no country like we know it.
Mary, you did a voter integrity check a few years ago. I remember we poured through all the voter rolls. And
yes.
Did you see potential for voter fraud?
Oh, 1,000%, yes. Do you remember the numbers? I think it was like there were like 6,000 people, dead people in the voter rolls, or the problem with
a couple hundred registered in 2 states to vote.
Right, and how many signatures didn't match the signature on the voter registration? And I mean, drastically didn't match the signature. There's the sky's the limit with that, and obviously the Democrats are pushing to have illegals vote anyway,
regardless of whether they're legal.
Regardless. And look, you can see the pushback when you see somebody like Cher come out with a tweet saying, you know, we can't even take care of our own, and everybody's saying, oh my God, look, she's finally seen the light. No, she's not seen the light. They're trying to take these people just the same way as Trump is saying, let's give them to the sanctuary cities. They're saying, hey, let's take these people and dump them into red states. And then let's give them the right to vote. And then while we're at it, let's try to eliminate the electoral college. So this way we have it locked up so that we never, ever, ever see American voters exercise their right to choose their representatives ever again. And instead, we're just going to have this is an invasion. This isn't even illegal immigration. This is an invasion.
And then Robert Beto O'Rourke will then pull down that wall, and then America will cease to exist.
Exactly.
The 200+ year experiment will be over at that point.
Yes.
Well, and there really isn't another place to go. Where is there another place that Americans can go and have the same rights? I mean, you're seeing that places like maybe Australia that might have had some potential, or New Zealand, are now falling into totalitarianism.
Yeah.
You know, we get lots of people in other groups that I work for researching who are saying that, you know, America is still the hope. People want to come here. You see very few people who want to leave America.
Well, because there's no place to go.
When you're talking about people who are on the voter rolls incorrectly, 1.5 million people were forced off of California rolls by Judicial Watch, by lawsuit. They're doing a fantastic job.
There's also been some that's been uncovered in Texas. I think a lot. We'll probably wrap it up with this because we only have a couple more minutes.
Yes, 58,000 questionable voters.
You also have the issue of when people move across state lines, these jurisdictions don't speak to each other. There needs to be a way to purge the rolls. Like if I move to another state, I might not even think to tell my state to scrub me from the rolls.
Right. Well, one thing that came out in a Supreme Court case last year is that one of the Midwestern towns, I'm not sure if it was Ohio, it might have been Ohio, had a process that if you didn't vote 2 national elections in a row,
they scrub you.
They would send you a letter. It was very methodical. Send you a letter to your last known address, and if it was returned, with like no answer, or you never received an affirmation back, then they took you off the rolls. And the people who had an agenda didn't want that to happen.
But that conceivably could still be up to 8 years before somebody is removed from the rolls.
National elections are every 2 years.
Oh, I thought you were talking about presidential. I'm sorry.
No, so you've got your midterms and you've got your
okay.
Yeah. So you would say 4 years, and we're looking here. In fact, one of the things that we're looking at here was I was as a consultant to someone, and I said, well, the way to start taking care of it is based on that Ohio law, was to ask, okay, the party here, the Republican Party here, was saying it's very expensive to try to send notices out to all their people trying to get them informed for the next election. So it's costing them money and a lot of effort to do it. And they know that maybe a lot of those are just being returned for no address and whatever. So I said, then what you do is you go to the local person here who's in charge, and you say, I want a list of all the people who haven't voted in 2 national elections. And well, you keep driving that to find out where the status is, right? So that instead of attacking, are these people legally illegal, while that case is moving through the courts, you go for the bigger, juiciest apple.
They should also be able to tap the boards of elections should be able to tap right into the Social Security death index.
Correct. It should.
And dead people should be removed from the rolls. They can cut off your Social Security in 9 minutes. Why can't they cut off your voting rights in the same amount of time once you're dead?
Yep.
Well, even if you were concerned about that, doing it this way, you would never have to tap into that database. You could say, if Granny has.
I think what you're saying is our resources aren't being used appropriately, and they should be.
Yeah, I mean, you still have 4 years. You still have 4, potentially even 5 years for something to be happening with somebody's voting rights. All I have to do is scan the obituaries, and I know I have 4 years to vote as that person.
Mary, that's not true, because you could start today anybody that hasn't voted 4 years ago.
Okay.
You could, but that's not in process. The things that are in process before we go, because we do have to wrap it up. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised. There's a lot of people who deny that there is voter fraud out there at all. There has been a lot that's being exposed that the television is just not telling you about. And Attorney General Matt Whitaker alluded to it in his testimony to Congress, and also handed over a report to them on voter fraud before he vacated his office.
Correct. That particular voter fraud report was due the 21st or the 22nd of December of last year. That was based on the requirement for an executive order. If you'll remember, Vice President Pence started a committee, was chair of a committee about voter fraud right after the election.
It was voter fraud commission, and it was disbanded because they didn't get any cooperation from the states.
No, it wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary to get cooperation. Security. But the people that were hollering were the ones that had the most to hide. But what they failed to see was Trump is running for president, already had all the voter rolls. He got that as candidate. So he turned that over to Pence's committee. Pence's committee disbanded it and handed it over to the Department of Homeland Security to do further investigation, because the committee had no law enforcement bite. All they are is to ask questions and get things set up. So that was sent over to Department of Homeland Security. And after the last election, the midterms, they have a whole scoop of where their people were in place and what they're about to present to the American people. So voter ID will become the way to go.
Well, Emma, you were definitely an expert in the field of all of this.
Oh my God, she's fantastic.
Really, I know that we're out of time for tonight. We'd love to come back to Texas and visit you again. But I want to give a little bit of time for anybody if they have any quick final thoughts. Mary?
I'm just blown away by how much Emma knows and what's going on down there. And I just think that we really need to listen to people who are in these border states, because what we up here, we don't even have a clue what it's like down there. They're fighting a war down there. And so, Emma, thank you for all you do, and thank you for all your research and all the information.
Well, there's two things I want to say before signing off. I'm sorry, I kind of maybe took too much of the conversation, but
no, it was great.
If you get a chance, go out on YouTube and find the Judicial Watch program video that has to do with El Paso. So if you go into the search area of YouTube and do El Paso Judicial Watch,
we could link it in the show notes as well. Okay. We can come back. All three of us.
I think I gave that to you already, Jenny. Okay, and the second one, I think for research would be very interesting is, say you get someone who's going to get asylum. They're talking about between 5 and 7% of anyone asking for asylum might well qualify. Usually it's because they can't feel that they can't go back to their country because of some danger. How long is asylum good for, where the conditions of the country changes, and then after that country changes, how soon can we get them to go home?
True.
Asylum is not a permanent status, right? You're in safekeeping.
Yeah. Yeah, it's time to go to California. Cher needs you. Cher needs you.
Is this the one? Is El Paso really a safe border city? Is that the one?
Is it about 45 minutes long? 48 minutes?
I believe so.
So we'll throw that in the bottom of the YouTube when this one goes live. We have just started. This was Mary's brainchild to put together a lot of our sisters that we've come to know. We've met many women along our travels, and we're hopefully bringing you an all-women panel with different issues from different states until we get rolling. It's kind of a new idea. Right now we have, 235 women that wanted to do that. It was amazing the amount of response that we had. 35 states out of 50, including a woman from St. Bart's.
36 states, because there's a Michigan lady now.
Yes, we got Michigan tonight. We even got Alaska. It was crazy. So
we have Alaska. Yes. Now we need Hawaii.
Yes, we need Hawaii, but we're going to get there. I mean, this was just our first call out to our friends, and we got
to say there were 57 states, right?
Yes, I forgot about that.
Yes.
And Puerto Rico.
Right.
Soon. Well, we hope everyone enjoyed our show. We'll be coming to you every Tuesday at 9 o'clock. And I know that this one's not as live yet. We just wanted to test all our bells and whistles, but we did record it, and we're still going to hit the button. So have a good night, everyone. Say good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.